Thank you. Just to make sure that we can hear the presentation clearly, please be sure to mute your line by pressing *# or the mute feature on your telephone. Once we get started, I'll go through and make sure everybody is muted, but just to be on the safe side, we'd appreciate it if you would do that. Share any questions that you may have in the Q&A pod during the presentation, and David will be sure to collect those at the end and ask those if we have time. If not, we will get responses and share those with the group after. And the presentation will be available at the end of the webinar in the bottom left-hand corner of the closing screen. And I'll also be sure to send it out with everything, including the recording and the transcript afterwards. And I will hand it over to David to get us started.
Thank you, Jessica. We appreciate the Iowa Coalition's continued efforts to partner and leverage resources with our Employment First groups, and that's allowing us to host these webinars so that providers and partners across the state can hear some common messaging as we try to move employment for people with disabilities forward. So thank you, Jessica, for all the work you're doing. This is the 5th out of 8 installments that we're hosting over the summer months to focus on some customized employment strategies. So people are at various stages of the process, but this allows us an opportunity for everybody to hear some common messaging and to work with your local teams to move communication forward. So we're very excited today to have Abby Cooper. Abby's the owner of Kennedy Consulting out of the state of Washington. She brings with her a wealth of background and experience in customized employment with efforts to increase employment for people with disabilities. She also has a special interest in financial stability and asset development and financial literacy. We've been able to hear her a couple of times earlier this year regarding those topics. So we're happy to bring her back and talk to us today. She's a recognized subject matter expert across the country with the Office of Disability and Employment Policy. She also brings with her background with the Washington State Vocational Rehabilitation System. So she has several different perspectives, and I think I'm really looking forward to hearing her comments today. I think we'll be entertained, but also it'll challenge our thought process and give us some things to think about in a new way. So with that, Abby, we'll turn it over to you. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much, David, and what a wonderful introduction. And also, thank you, everyone, for being on the phone and on the webinar. I know that webinars are a tad bit difficult to pay attention to. What I want to talk about today is really customized employment from start to finish. In the first slide, where you see the bear chasing the little girl, is there because I think when we move forward and change, lots of times we feel that way. We feel like we've got it right, and all of a sudden there's all these other forces behind us saying, no, 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 how come you didn't do this? How come you didn't do that? And it's difficult to change how we're used to doing things. So I wanted to acknowledge that right up front. What I'd like to talk about today is strategies, first of all, to create the culture to change internally for customized employment. And under that, I'm going to talk about useful assumptions and kind of the supervisor and management's role in supporting staff. Then we're going to talk a little bit about maintaining focus and how you don't get caught, how you keep your focus on customized employment, because all back to what we have always done. So how do you keep your focus there? And then I want to spend just a tad bit of time talking a little bit about how to ensure discovery lays the foundation for customized employment planning. And lastly, things to think about in developing and maintaining quality staff in the delivery of customized employment. So hopefully that's what everybody signed up for. just to do a super quick review, because of the 48 people that are listening, probably everybody has a little bit different take on stuff. So they hire me to do this because I'm good at stating the obvious. But I just kind of want to review the steps in customized employment as I see it, so we're all on the same page. In the first phase is discovery. And we know that what discovery is learning about a person through spending time with them, of learning about when they're at their best. And probably the trickiest thing about discovery is translating the information from their lives into tasks they can do for pay. So that's discovery. We have the profile. And the profile is a positive written document that's based on what was learned in discovery, and it lays the foundation for the planning meeting, but it's not planning. It's the thing that usually who's ever funding the discovery, whether it's vocational rehabilitation, whether it's being funded through the waiver, through mental health, it's the document that the funder gets that says, this is what we've learned in discovery. Here are the possibilities around employment. And then it moves to a customized employment planning meeting. And in the customized employment meeting, you review what works, what doesn't work, contribution an employer would be interested in that the person brings to the table, what tasks the person wants and can do for pay. And something that we usually negate but is phenomenally important for all of us is the conditions that are needed to be successful. The reason I say we commonly negate that is sometimes we poo-poo people's conditions. We say, well, everybody has to start somewhere, so you're going to have to give up bowling if you're really serious about working, because that's the hours I found. And so one thing that's different about customized employment is you really look at what the person's conditions are to be successful, because sometimes when we negate those conditions, we all know this happens. We all know people lose their jobs. And the last piece is customized job development, and that is one person at a time. It's not a bait and switch. It's not go talk to employers of massive job development, and I'm sure I have somebody on my caseload who can meet your needs. It's really looking at the one person, what their contributions are, what their tasks they want to do for pay are, and what employer in the community would be interested in that person. And then it's using a visual resume to represent that person. And then it's a negotiated relationship between the employer and the job seeker, or the representative of the job seeker, that basically is saying, this is how I believe we can meet your unmet needs. So I just want to make sure we are all on the same page. I apologize for everybody on the line who already knows this, but I thought we needed to lay that foundation. So the first thing I want to talk about is the role of risk and uncertainty with change. And this took me forever to realize, but there's a difference. There's a big difference. A risk is something you can gauge. Because of your past experience, you have a sense of the possible outcomes. And based on that experience in your knowledge, when you take a risk, you have a reasonable idea of the expected outcomes. But in uncertainty, you don't have any way to gauge. You don't know, because you've never been in that situation before. And it means one is unclear of what will happen, and you have no way to project the possible outcomes. And the reason I bring this up is sometimes when agencies or people engage in systems change, they forget that a lot of the staff or a lot of people that are involved in it have no idea what's going to happen next. They have no idea how to project the possible outcomes because they've never done it before. And when somebody's in that state, whether it be a staff person, whether it be a job seeker, they freeze because they don't know what the next steps are. And for all the administrators on the line and supervisors and people that have influence, you need to be very careful, and you need to think about how you paint a picture of what's going to happen next, so people can move from uncertainty to risk. Because I will bet you any amount of money that there is nobody on the phone that likes to fail. There's nobody that goes to work, wakes up in the morning and says, okay, let me see how I can fail today. But if we don't know how to gauge things, we kind of perpetually feel like we're in that failure mode because we have no way to project whether we're doing well or not doing well. So one thing that I think is critical for all the agencies, that whether you are, in the middle of transformation, whether you're just shifting how you do employment, or whether you're just starting a small customized employment pilot, it's very important that you help people understand where you're moving forward and how you're moving forward. I think there's something else critical that lays the foundation for us to be successful, and that is changing our vantage point. All of us on the line, from when we were little, were taught that if you were analytical, if you were critical, then you're smart, you're being realistic, you're being effective. Because if we gets us in trouble when we start thinking about making these changes, is that we forget that you can analyze things to death. We forget that sometimes the most important thing is being positive in belief. And I'm not saying you don't have to analyze. I'm not saying you don't have to have a strategic direction. But there's also a piece of it where we need to see possibilities. And frequently, we assume a person who's positive is just being naive. And I know there's people on the line that have thought, well, they just don't get it. They just don't get it. They don't see this, and this is why it won't happen. And think about when you do that more. Your agency's involved in change, and you're not sure what your role is. And then all of a sudden, you start picking it apart. Yeah, well, this won't work, this won't work, this won't work. As opposed to saying, okay, let's see what pieces of this puzzle will work, and let's see how we build on it. The other thing that we tend to do when there's change is we play the yes, but game, which is my personal favorite. Yes, but that won't work because of blah, blah, blah. Or we play the blame game. We start down the path of customized employment, and then all of a sudden we flip and we start blaming the client because we can't find them a job. We blame our supervisor because they didn't give us enough support. Or we blame the providers in our community because, they just don't get it. And we forget then to step back and think about how do we paint a picture for people. Another one that I just love, which I personally think vocational rehabilitation is amazingly guilty of, and that is you try something new and there's counselors who will say, oh, we tried that years ago, but that just didn't work because of blah, blah, blah. And when you get stuck there, the trouble is that you forget that in order to see possibilities, you need to change your vantage point. You need to think of what if, as opposed to this won't work, this won't work, this won't work. You need to always be focusing on what would make this work. What do we need to do different? And you need to be positive. You have to also be willing to take risk. And we know that we only can take risk if we understand what the risks are, if we can gauge the outcome, and we take responsibility. If we try a new approach to get somebody a job and it doesn't work, well, it's kind of like, so what? Let's analyze it. Let's see how we move forward. It's not a matter, no children died. There were no car accidents. I mean, on the overall scale of things, we need to be positive. We need to be willing to take risks, and we need to take responsibility. So if things don't work out, then we figure out how to change it and make it and make it work. I also think there's a critical piece in this, and that is changing your agency culture. And whether you are a private nonprofit, whether you're a for-profit, whether you're a state agency, how we view people matters. Wherever you work in the field, it matters substantially. And it matters that we realize that many, many people who come to our doors are incredibly fragile when they come to our doors. Think about it. Who would just willingly come to your services? You wouldn't, because you wouldn't need it, because you would have the resources to do it yourself. So just think about, you don't have those resources. That's going to make you pretty fragile. And we forget that. And we forget, or maybe we don't, or maybe I just forget, that job seekers or the people who are in their life, many of them have somebody in their life that doesn't believe they can work. And they are like the loudest, that won't work, that won't work. Or the person themselves doesn't believe they can work. Because we know this. There isn't anybody on the line that doesn't know. Nobody goes to work unless people believe they can work. Every person on this phone is currently gainfully employed because somebody believed you would work. Somebody, when you were little, said, what are you going to do when you grow up? Somebody else said, yeah, you can go to college. We'll figure out how to pay for that. Somebody else said, you know, I know somebody who you might want to talk to. They might have a job for you. But you had resources and you had people that every step of the way believed in you. You had somebody in your life that said, yeah, go get that master's or go get that doctorate. And a lot of the people that come to our doors don't have that great support system. And I just love this quote, and you guys are going to now know my taste in music. But Tom Waite has, from his song, Come Up to the House, says, all you can see is what you lack. And for a lot of folks, if I was to play a little game now on the line and have everybody tell me 20 great things about themselves, you would probably get stomped at, 5, 6. But if I was to say, tell me 20 things about yourself you could improve, you would probably get stumped at about 10, 12. Because all of us know what we're not as good at. And if you're already in a fragile state, you have people coming to you who can't see their contributions. And that's why if you move the route of customized employment where it starts looking at where a person's at their best, it's very helpful. But even if you don't move to customized employment, there's some things you can do in your intake process. Because lots of times our intake process reinforces that employment's not feasible for a person. Just think of some of the questions we ask. I'd be mortified to answer them, Have you ever had any problems in school? Well, who hasn't? And then we ask all these things, problems with panic attack, anger management, hallucinations. Have you ever spent time hospitalized? We ask a lot of things that don't highlight a person's strengths. Then we flip it, and then we turn around and we've determined, yeah, you have a disability. Okay, let's go to work. But the person's still back at all the things they can't do. We don't tend to start at the positive. We don't tend to say your first question to a person doesn't, maybe we say, what do you want to do? And usually the person says, well, I don't know. But we don't start with things like, tell me what you're most proud of. Or tell me when you're at your best. So we start with an opportunity to have a person kind of shine. And then we move to the more difficult information, which we do need to know in order to plan and help the person move forward. But we don't necessarily need to lead with it. So we need to think about how we reframe stuff for people. Because everybody on this line and everybody I've ever met, I've never, ever met anybody that wanted to present themselves with, let me tell you everything that's wrong with me. we all, particularly when we don't know people, particularly when we're in a situation where we feel uncomfortable, we want to present ourselves in the best light. I have friends that to this day still make fun of me because the first time they met me, all I would say was hello and it was nice meeting you. And they said, we thought you had no personality whatsoever. And I wanted to present myself in the best light. I wanted to kind of know the rules before I showed who I was. And we all do that. So it's really thinking about how can you add some questions to your intake, your eligibility that allows a person to do that. How do we ask if a person's worked, what their dependable strengths are? What tasks did they always like, did they always enjoy when they worked? We can ask them what the employer liked about his or her work. We can ask them what's the best thing somebody has said about them. And if they say, I don't know, then you can say, by the next time we meet, I want you to go ask one person to tell you the best thing about you, and I want you to come back and tell me. So we want to provide an avenue for people to hear positive stuff about themselves, because we all know when you hear positive stuff about yourself, you start to believe it. Who have they helped lately? Because if they've helped somebody, there are skills that you can pull out from that story that can be useful as you start translating what a person can do for pay. And we need to become very skilled, which I'm sure a lot of people on the line are, of rephrasing what somebody says about themselves in a positive or neutral light. And the ability to do that is amazingly powerful. It really helps people think a little bit differently about themselves. Okay, I'm going to move to the next slide. Once again, like I said, you're going to know my taste in music. But Van Morrison has a line in one of his songs that most people think that everything is just what they assume. And we all do that. We all assume because I think this is correct. And the reality is that just because we assume it doesn't mean that is accurate. So we need to be very careful as we move forward in making change, of thinking about what our assumptions are and our language. We really need to think about what our biases and influences are, particularly as we start helping folks with more significant disabilities move forward in employment. We hold a lot of assumptions. And for those of you on the line that are old like me, we have a whole litany of assumptions that it's pretty important that we check them out. And you think about ways to check them out so you don't label people so quickly. And I think one of the most unfortunate things in our society today is we label so quickly. Just think about yourself. You've done 3 intakes in a day. You've made some assumption. The 4th intake comes in, and you're tired. And somebody says the same thing that the person before you, that you interviewed before, says. You make assumptions. You label that person very quickly. And sometimes when we start to label too quickly, and I know everybody has a million things to do, and I know we all work way too hard, but somehow we've got to slow down on our labeling because sometimes we don't see the person. And our perception is based on our unique experiences. It doesn't mean our perceptions are right. It just means that they're based on our experiences. So we need to slow down to make sure we see the person. The other thing that I think is critical when working, and particularly in customized employment, is share all the information. Share the good, the bad, the neutral information. And as you go through doing discovery, share the information with the person, share the information with the folks that are close to that person, their supports. And explain your thinking. Lots of times this kind of goes with labeling that we know why we're thinking what we're thinking in our head, and we think we're correct, so we forget to explain it. We also forget to validate our job seekers' thinking or validate their networks thinking. Validation doesn't mean you agree. It's just that you get it. You understand why they're thinking that way. Okay, and I think it's important that we really check when people hear, and I just love this. You have the physician say, 2 aspirins, and the person saying, brain tumor. Because lots of times what we say and what people hear is radically different. So let's bring this back to customized employment in 2 ways. You have an agency that is transforming itself into customized, and you're the director. Well, what you say may not be heard of how you intended it. And so it's always important that we check what people hear. I never leave a job development call or a meeting with a family without saying, can we recap for a second? Can you tell me what you heard from our conversations? Because I want to be able to correct anything as quickly as possible and not leave misinformation hanging out there. Because we all know that misinformation is a killer. It can come back and bite you later on. For anyone who on the line who's done benefits planning, you know the amount of the fountains of misinformation that happen because we forgot to check what people heard. Okay, so let's talk for a second just a little bit more about management's role in creating change. And I read this thing once that said, and I'm going to butcher the quote, but it said something like, just because it's changed doesn't mean that it's good. And I think as we think about changing, and I think as we think about changing to customized employment and maintaining it, we want to make sure that we're creating good change, that we're not creating chaos. And I unfortunately learned this the very hard way. I guess it was about 20 years ago now. I ran one of RSA's informed choice demonstrations for the state of Washington. And I kind of knew where I wanted to go in my head with it. I'd written the grant, and I thought life was hunky-dory, and I'd given my staff to read the grant. But I didn't create a vision for my staff of what the change would look like, and I didn't create a reasonable set of standards. So everybody was floundering around not knowing what to do, and they're very talented people, but they were becoming incredibly ineffective until I realized I didn't create a vision for people. And I didn't say, okay, based on this vision, these are the set of standards that we're going to measure ourselves by. And based on these set of standards, it's reasonable to think we'll get these outcomes. And we'll monitor it to see how we need to modify it. So it's critical that not only do we create a vision for our staff, but we also set reasonable standards. And in that, since we all live in the era of everything should have happened yesterday, we need to take a deep breath and realize change takes time. And the change that we want is we want good time. We want it to be good change. So if it means it takes a little bit longer to get to the outcomes we want, that's okay than rushing it and not getting what you need. It's also critical that we involve our staff in the process. We need to ask our staff what information do they need to make a change. And then when they tell you, it's critical that you don't say, oh, that's not important. We don't need that. We've already done that. So you need to ask staff and you need to listen. And you need to kind of figure out how you honor what they need. I think another thing that's very important as we're moving forward to customized employment and change is figuring out how many job seekers with complex barriers you can afford to place. And years ago when I ran an agency, I actually did spreadsheets because I knew that I had to make my payroll. I also knew that I wanted my agency to move forward to working with folks who had pretty complex barriers. So how could I afford to do that? Knowing that some folks with complex barriers were going to take me a lot longer, and I was going to get reimbursed a lot later. So what did that need to look like? What did my budget need to look like? So when you're creating change towards customized employment or for employing folks with complex disabilities, don't forget the budget piece. I also think it's important that we start small and we build. If we start too big with change, that's going to be riddled with mistakes. And it's a lot easier, as everybody knows, it's a lot easier to make a small mistake and change it than to make a colossal mistake. And I think if you're moving forward, and if anybody on the line hasn't done this, I highly recommend that you do it, is that if you're moving forward in customized employment, then provide your staff with really good negotiation training. Few people are taught how to negotiate. Many people feel reluctant to negotiate, but one of the key pillars of customized employment is the negotiation with the employer, the looking at what the employer's unmet needs are and how that matches your job seeker's contributions. And that's got to be a negotiation. And if we don't help our staff know how to negotiate and we just say, go out, get those jobs, go negotiate, then what's going to happen to your staff person is they are going to fall back on labor market job development because that's what they know. So we've got to make sure we give the staff the training they need. And I already said this, but I'd like to repeat myself. So I think you want to create person-centered procedures. You really do want to look at your intake. You really do want to look at how you make sure that it's driven by the job seeker. Because, you know, one thing we complain about sometimes is we complain, or maybe not in Iowa, maybe just in Washington, but we complain that people think we have jobs in our drawer and we can just pull them out and say, here's your job. Part of that is because people don't understand their role. They've been sent to you. You're supposed to find them a job. So, of course, I think that's what you're going to do. And if we can help them think through this is about them, and here's their role in the process, and here's how they can help us, that makes people far more invested. And I think we need to start rewarding staff for the process, not just the outcomes. The outcome is incredibly important, don't get me wrong. But I think that we also have to reward people for being person-centered and for how they look at people's contributions, whether they do discovery, and we need to reward them for that. And for those of you who are private nonprofit, I think you should use your board to support your change. You know, your board can do all kinds of things. You can have a group on your board that is willing to review visual resumes that your staff create for their job seekers, or the job seeker creates with their staff. I think it's critical that for those, and probably most of you already have this, but create a business advisory board. Provide your board and the business advisory board with training on customized employment so they understand what it is. And then ask them how they can help you. What strategies do they suggest as a business owner? How would they suggest identifying unmet needs? But give them the information and then brainstorm with them. It's amazing how smart people are. The reality is we're not the only smart people in the world, and we're not the only people that care about folks with significant disabilities going to work. But we lots of times don't give people an avenue to use their expertise with us. And I think doing that will also help you stay the course. Okay, so talking about staying the course, let's talk just a tad about maintaining focus. Once your staff have been chosen, once you have, and probably all of you have already gone through customized employment training, but choose staff to do customized employment that believe in the process. Choose staff that not only like to do discovery, because discovery is fun, everybody likes to do discovery, but choose staff who like to do discovery and also like to work with employers. Also like to kind of look at what unmet needs are, who believe that folks with the most significant disabilities can work. Don't choose your doubting Thomas Thomases to be the ones that lead with customized employment. Choose the people that think, this is the best thing since toast. This is cool. We can do this. This will be fun. Okay. I also think that it's difficult for the same person to do customized job development and labor market job development. I think you're better off if you don't expect the same person to do both. And this is why. They come from things at a totally different angle. If I'm doing labor market job development, in the end, labor market development is about me. It's about me and whether that employer trusts me and that I establish a relationship with that employer around my marketing ability and my ability to schmooze and to sell, and then to say, I have this group of people who really need to work, and they've all been pre-screened, and I can choose one of them to meet your needs. So that's more a labor market approach, which is different than a customized. Because a customized employment is different than a labor market in the sense that it's less about sales and marketing, and it's more about information. It's more about how looking at your unmet needs will help you have your business be more efficient, have your business run smoother, have your products go out quicker. But it's really about what are your unmet needs. Let me identify them, and then let me show you, or let me present this person that I think can match that unmet need. It's really more about explaining the information, giving the employer the opportunity to say, you know what, Abby, this really doesn't fit for me. Or, yeah, I got a trail of shame. I have all kinds of unmet needs. I'm more than happy to sit down with you. So the approach is different. It's also different in that it's one person at a time. So when you're doing customized job development, you're saying, I'm here to represent Tessa Lindman. When I'm doing labor market job development, I'm saying I'm here to represent super duper employment agency who has folks who I truly believe can meet your need. It's hard for people to switch back and forth. I personally think, for what it's worth, that staff that are doing customized employment should have a smaller caseload, because customized employment at the front end takes a lot more time. If you're expecting somebody to do discovery, do the planning meeting, and then job develop, well, the front end's going to take more time. And you want the front end to take more time because you want it to be done well, so then the person goes to work. So I think it's a little difficult to do it if you have a large caseload. Just some basic things is, once a customized plan has been created, follow it. I am called in all the time to work with agencies that have done all this hard work and have done really nice discovery and have a great employment plan of what employer they're going to contact by when, and then they throw it out the window. They kind of say, well, you know, we called the first two employers and they weren't interested, so now I'm going back and I'm just doing labor market. And it's kind of like, no, you did this really good plan. So let's follow it to fruition. And then if it doesn't work, then let's kind of think of, are there pieces we don't know? What information don't we know? Do we need to do extended discovery on the person or on the community? What did we miss here? I also think that keep people focused is you got to reward success. You know, it always blows me away in this field. We are so reinforcing to the people we serve and our job seekers, but we're not very reinforcing to each other. We're not that reinforcing to our staff. So we got to really reward success. And we got to remember, there's no silver bullet. Whether you do labor market, whether you do project search, whether you do customized employment, or whether you do the next hip thing, employment's hard. Securing employment for individuals with significant complexities and barriers is difficult. And so we need to relish our successes, and we need to really reward people for these successes, and also realize that if a job's not obtained, it's not the end of the world. There's a way to figure this out and get that person employed. Okay, so some things to think about if employment's not being secured. And I just said this, but I'm good at repeating myself, as you all notice now. Think about what information you're missing to get a picture of that person working. You know, do you need to learn more about the person or the business's unmet need? Which is it? And if it's the person, how do you learn it? Do you need more observation? Do you need to do a work experience or an internship? And if you need to do a work experience or an internship, what are the pieces you need to know? And make sure the person knows the pieces you need to know, because you're going to want to think carefully about how you set those experiences up for the person to be successful, that you can build on it. It's not like one of those trial works that sometimes we do so that we can say, see, this person can't work. It's kind of the exact opposite. It's like, what are the discrete tasks we want this person to do so that they can be successful, so that we can build on it? And how could assistive technology help? I'm always like kind of blown away about how frequently we forget that assistive technology can be very helpful when we do placements. So don't forget that piece. And also, which I know nobody on the line would do, but don't blame the person. Sometimes we get so frustrated and we've tried so hard and we've crawled on our belly like a reptile to get the jobs and things still aren't happening. Then we fall back on, well, the person's really not employable. We tried really hard. So don't blame the person. Don't decide the person's not employable. Go back and say, look at what else do I need to know to make this work. And don't think you got to figure it out all yourself. There are many people that I've worked with that I know darn well I am not smart enough to figure this out. And I call in people who I think are smart enough. You know, I call in the PT or the OT. I call in the assistive tech person. I call in people that have more contacts than me. But I use the resources I have. So don't think also if employment isn't being secured that one person has to figure it out. Use your resources. So if it's the business you need to learn more about, how do you get that information? How do you use your advisory board? How do you use your board? And how do you go on, set up informational interviews, thinking about what you want to know about the business? What are the trends? What are their unmet needs? What are the directions do they think they're going? Go on tours. I love to go on tours just because it gives me more information, and the more information I know, the more useful I can be to my job seekers. Talk to trade organizations. Pay attention to what the trends are, but all this information will help you move forward in a customized job. You know, the more you know about the tasks that occur in business, the more you can help your job seeker obtain jobs that match their contribution. I personally, just a little tidbit here, love job development. And the reason I love job development and the reason I love to go on tours and understand trends is because I think it is so incredibly hard. And I think it's so incredibly interesting, all the different things that occur in our community. And I think if you view it that way, you will learn a lot more information about the businesses in your community. Even if you go on tours and nobody ever goes to work there, you've learned more information that will help you lay the foundation for the next job seeker that you work with. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up quickly so we have time for questions. But I do think what we think businesses want impacts how we work with people, how we plan, and who we consider employable. And I just, because, you know, for anyone who's been out there job developing, you know you've talked to people who talk about how you have to multitask. So I just put in this cartoon because it kind of is what I think about multitasking. We want somebody who can multitask during the interview. I'd like you to fill out these forms and have a physical. And it's kind of like we have all those absurdities that we put in place around multitasking. But if we think that's what business wants, then we don't let certain people work at certain places. We plan not as openly. So it's really important we think about what our common assumptions are. And real quickly, some basic common assumptions are that they want a competitive workforce. We live in a capitalist society. They want a little more than what they're paying for. We all know when we hire somebody that's willing to work for our pay and they're super skilled, we think, hot damn, I hit the jackpot. Why would this person come work for me? We think that they want employees to have the ability to multitask. And we think they want employees they can understand with little effort. And we think that sometimes the job descriptions are written by people who know what they need, which we know frequently is not the case, that a job is defined by the job description, that pay is based on work performed, productivity, and multitasking, that businesses won't change. They're intractable. Employers will not tolerate continuing assistance. Well, we know as we go through those that a lot of those assumptions are wrong. We know everybody on this line can point out how there's some truth to some of these and how some of these are not true for other employers. So they're not very helpful assumptions, because what they do is they reinforce our fears that individuals with significant complexities are too difficult to place. They increase our thinking that employers will not be willing to hire job seekers who are complex. And in doing that, then we do the switch. We go for a customized, and we say, oh, they'll never hire Charlie. Charlie's nonverbal. Charlie likes to go and hug people. He's not very good at social cues. He can't work in this place. I'll put David in. David presents really well. And so we switch, even though we don't mean to. And so we need to make sure that our assumptions are correct. So I think some more helpful assumptions, which is not true everywhere, but there is truth in these assumptions. Many times job descriptions are outlined. You can help shape them. If you're negotiating a job, you can help shape that job description. And we all know this. What an employer will pay for varies widely and is based on their need. And their needs vary widely. We also know in our current economy, business is fluid. It is not intransient. We define the job by how it meets the employer's need. That's really how we want to think about job development. How does this meet the employer's need? How will the employer be better off? Not related back to the complexity of the person we represent. And I really, truly believe we need to think about, we have something employers need. And there's a whole list of why employers should work with us. But probably the most meaningful one I ever heard was years ago when I was running a program that was for folks with cerebral palsy and cognitive issues. And I worked with this one bank in town. And later on I went to the bank vice president. I said, Katie, why did you work with me? And she said, Ab, there are a few times in your life when people give you an opportunity to do something very important, and you gave us that opportunity. That's pretty powerful. We can be, and we know this, we can be proactive. We can negotiate, and lots of times our staff are afraid to negotiate, but we can negotiate. We can establish a long-term relationship with businesses, and even if we never employ anybody there, they're a resource. They are, they have expertise that we don't have, that we're going to want to tap into. Okay, so good. We're going to have time for questions. I want to recap just real quickly. And that is, change requires more than just demanding it. You can't just say, I want this, so therefore you nice little minions go do it. It requires strategic thinking. It requires input. It requires setting standards. It requires understanding the unexpected consequences of the change. So there's a lot to think about. Unfortunately, it's not as easy as saying, I want this. And leadership must provide the infrastructure for the change. Staff can't do that. And without that infrastructure, without those outcomes, without that support, staff will flounder. And I firmly believe that maintaining focus requires both belief and strategy. Belief alone is not going to cut it. Strategies alone is not going to cut it. You really do need to follow the steps of customized employment and not cut corners, because that'll help you. And you need to be willing to change your assumptions. And that's it. Thank you so much. And I'd really like for us to have some conversations. So, David, back to you.
Abby, thank you very much. There's lots of nuggets of good information. I'm smiling to myself because a couple of things that I heard you say I'm really disappointed in. There's no silver bullet. There's no mind reading about what my vision is. And I think from the one picture, I'm not going to have you multitask with me. So, and I question whether I want to go to the rock concert with your music taste. There's lots of good stuff. Hey, one of the things that you talked about right at the beginning that I thought was really interesting, and you were talking about the documentation with customized employment, and particularly the role of the profile and how the profile helps you move into employment planning. And what I captured out of the documentation was that it's really what you've learned and how that will help you move employment options forward. And I think a lot of the times we get hung up on what the documentation looks like, or it has to be on a certain form. And I thought that was real important. Would you like to make any other comments about that?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Sure. I think it's very. I think when you do the potential of forgetting, it's high. So what you want that document to be is everything you learned in discovery, and you want to give it to people before the customized employment meeting so they start having the same basis of the information as you do who did discovery. So let's say I'm a VRC. Then if I have your profile, the profile that you've done based on discovery, I can bring my expertise to the table. You list out the tasks Abby would like to do for pay, and I am aware of different employers in the community that might have some of those tasks. So if I have the information before I read it, I have a chance to think about it, then when I come to that meeting, I can bring information that maybe you don't have that'd be useful. I don't think it's so much which form you use. I do think it's critical that you write it down. I do think it's critical that it's a positive document, and it allows and it gives people ideas. Because there's so many people that we work with that everybody's kind of looking at each other going, well, yeah, I'd love to get him a job, but what can he do? Or what can she do? So your profile, to be successful, has really got to lay the foundation for planning and giving people some ideas to move forward with. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you. Hey, one of the other areas that you put a big emphasis on was negotiation. We've not spent a lot of time talking about negotiation. Could you kind of wet our whistles a little bit? I think we'll be getting into this a little bit in the future, but kind of give folks an idea and elaborate a little bit more on that, because we haven't spent much time addressing that as a skill.
Sure. First, I guess the first thing is I saw Leanne's question, what type of negotiation training is available. And, almost every community has a dispute resolution center. And I would connect with them because most dispute resolution centers do a really nice negotiation training. But when I'm talking about negotiation training, I'm talking about having the basic skills that you know how to present something to an employer. You understand what the employer's real need is. You understand what his concerns or her concerns might be, and you're able to acknowledge how some of those concerns are the same concerns you have, and then you're able to brainstorm with the employer about what is possibilities. Because one thing that I think that we do way too much is we rush with the solution. And as soon as somebody rushes into the solution, it's kind of like, well, that's cool, that's great, so you're going to take care of all of this, and I don't have to do anything. And what you really want is it to be the employer's idea. What you really want is to build something together. And we all know we all love our own ideas. So the more it's the employer's idea, the more the employer becomes invested in it. And David, I can send you, or whomever I should, a really short model on negotiation that is probably people should look at. It's pretty easy, you know. You ask her what you want, you ask what the person's concerns are, you reiterate their concerns, and then you problem solve together. So it's pretty non-threatening, and the greatest thing about it is it works. The other thing to remember about negotiation is employers have to negotiate all the time. So from the social service field, that's something that we don't feel comfortable with. But from the business are totally comfortable with it. You know, I once saw, this is terrible, it was for an ad for Scotch in the New York magazine, but it said, in business you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. And I think businesses are very used to negotiating. It's us that needs a little more support. But if you want me to send you that model, I'm happy to send it to you, and you can share it with folks.
Excellent. Great points. Please do send that to Jess and myself. And sure. Just as a reminder for all the participants, we do post the recordings of this on our website, on the IVRS website, and we'll also post any of the materials that we get. And so we'll make sure that you have the negotiation sheet available on that. We also have some future training scheduled. Our next scheduled meeting is with Michael Callanan from Mark Gold and Associates. And Michael will be talking a little bit about kind of continuing this conversation on quality, competent staff and how do we keep it moving. And then we conclude with our last two meetings, webinars, with Val Morgan talking about job development and getting more into some of the selling skill strategies and negotiation skill strategies. So that will be how we end up with a couple of sessions. We recently found out the possibility that in our next fiscal year there may be some additional funding to continue some of our Employment First efforts with some ongoing training. So Jess will tell you here in a second about how to get on and ask questions and to fill out the survey. But if you have some topics that you think we're not getting to or that you think of down the road, please make sure to address that in the survey information. And that we're trying to find ways to integrate responses to those questions in our future sessions, but it will also lay a foundation for us to maybe build in our grant application to continue efforts to make sure that we can continue finding ways to message out information and education to people across the state as our discussion continues. Abby, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing some of your expertise. I think there's a lot of information that will be of value. And again, I'll encourage our group to go back and share it with staff that didn't get to participate today, but that can access the webinar, the recorded webinar, and we'll get that information out. Jessica, I'll turn it over to you for final comments.
Thank you, David, and thanks again, Abby. Just want to encourage everybody to answer the survey questions if you haven't already. We really appreciate you doing that. And as David said, under sharing recommendations for future webinar topics, if there's anything you'd like to see us try to integrate in the webinars to follow, if not, we will try to integrate them into future webinars if we're able to do that. So again, we really appreciate those comments. Abby's presentation is in the lower left-hand corner, but I will send that out along with everything else before the week wraps up. And thanks again for joining us. And I'll keep the room open. Oh, yes, go ahead, Abby.
I was just going to say goodbye and thank you.
Thanks so much, Abby.
Sure, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.